Hello everyone and welcome back to another video where today I want to talk about Russell's latest quotes with regards to the future of Doctor Who and a potential successor and, the succession plan for him eventually when he does decide to leave. Now, I believe this is taken from the Pilot TV podcast, which I'll be honest, is not a podcast I know an awful lot about. I did do a quick Google before this, and apparently they mainly seem to talk about a TV show called Code of Silence, but for whatever reason they had Russell T Davies on recently, and he basically discussed the future and, obviously the fact that there's a pause and all of this sort of stuff, and also, some stuff about a potential successor and who could replace him. It's largely stuff we've heard before, but there are a few new tidbits in there that I find interesting. So we're going to be diving right into this, but be sure to subscribe if you're new. That'd be greatly appreciated. We do regular Doctor Who content here on the channel, and we are almost at 13,000 subscribers. We're just about to hit 29,200, and this is the final milestone, the one that I've tried to get for ages. So if we can get there, I'd be so grateful. But let's dive right into it. So once again, I want to give a shout out to William Who for bringing this to my attention on his Twitter account. Russell talks about the future of Doctor Who likely won't be a decision from Disney until a few months after the last episode, while Disney look at the viewing figures. As he says, it's really unfortunate the annual plan for Who hasn't worked out. So yeah, obviously this is the quote, and we're going to take a listen. By the way, William, you need to charge your phone 4%, it's going to die. Anyway, carrying on, let's take a listen.
Oh, we've got this pause. I wish this pause wasn't happening, but that's the way the streaming world, Disney will decide whether to fund more after the transmission of season 2. And that's simply it. It's like people keep on saying to me, yeah, what's really happening? What's really going on behind the scenes? And I'm like, nothing, honestly. Even people I work with, and every day going, yeah, what's really happening? As though there's a secret red Disney phone here. I wish I did. I'd be brilliant. Where deals and he cuts at midnight. It's like literally, they will decide at the end of season 2, and even then it won't be immediate. I think a couple of months will pass while they look at figures and stuff like that. So there's no secrets. It's just literally not happening, which is unfortunately built in a pause. If it does come back in that shape and form, then we wouldn't be able to start straight away. So there would be longer than 12 months between series. That's a shame, because I'd really love to make it an annual show. And I think for children that's important. You could sort of say it's always on in April, May. I think kids feel that in their bones more than adults do, maybe. However, maybe that's wrong. Maybe they're all so busy streaming now they don't notice a season any more than anyone else does. So yes, it's like, of course I'll move on one day, and there are brilliant people who could take over. And it's funny. A lot of people always say, "Oh, what it needs now is a showrunner who's never seen it before, who's never been a fan, who's not invested, so we could all be completely new." Those same people tend to say, "Don't you dare take the Doctor's quotes."
Yeah, right.
They want the show to be all new and imaginative and brilliant. Don't eat that in your clothes. Then we can cry. Don't do that. Don't do anything. It's like the list of things that want to happen is just so mad. But I wonder, who can tell? Very interesting.
So there you go. Obviously, that's the quote in question. Obviously, I assume the question that was asked was, how long are you planning to stick around for Doctor Who? And obviously, this was his response. So, interestingly, obviously, he says that it'll probably take a few months after the transmission of season 2 before we get an answer. Obviously, I assume this would have been recorded prior to season 2's broadcast, judging by the way that he was speaking, but perhaps it's only just been released now. These podcasts get filmed ahead of time. There's a couple of interesting points of note here, I think. First of all, I think the thing that he said that, a gap is inevitable of 12 months or more, which, we knew. But also the fact that he is disappointed that it isn't a yearly show. We know back to the old Doctor Who magazine interviews, that's one thing he really wanted to do, was make it a yearly show, and obviously this pause has meant that it is not. I don't quite believe him when he says that this is just the streaming world thing, and that's why we're waiting, because I think if it was the case, then he wouldn't have mentioned yearly Doctor Who as a possibility years prior. I do think that this pause is likely as a byproduct of Doctor Who not performing to expectations. With that said, nothing has been decided on Disney's end yet by the sounds of things, and while it's, certainly not the most ideal situation, I think the fact that it hasn't been decided yet is cause to, just wait and see what happens before we all just collectively decide it's gone, or, it's staying, or whatever. As I said in yesterday's video, I think it's very interesting that the streaming rights for new Doctor Who prior to this new Disney deal haven't been renewed with any existing streaming partner that they have. So that implies that maybe that could be put on the table as a potential sweetener for Disney signing back on. I don't know. The other interesting thing he says is he talks about successors, and he says there are multiple talented people who could take over. So I am glad that he is at least aware of people. Obviously he doesn't name them specifically here, but he is aware of people who he thinks, they could take over. Whether that is, in my head, when you're sort of thinking of the people who could take over, it does seem like Pete McTeague is kind of being groomed as a potential showrunner successor. He's written multiple episodes in this era. He's done things for Tales of the TARDIS, the Blu-rays, and most recently he's like the co-showrunner or like co-producer on The War Between Land and Sea alongside Russell. So if I had to guess who he means when he says this, I would argue he's probably high up on the list, which is interesting. Again, I'm slightly hesitant of that because I have been quite critical of a lot of Pete McTeague's prior Doctor Who work. I did like Lucky Day though, so there is that, and we'll see what War Between is like. But yeah, the other thing I think is very interesting and is very true is just what he says about Doctor Who fans always saying, we want someone completely new and completely fresh to come in and do something completely different with it, but then you make any minor change to the Doctor as a character or the way he's functioned prior to the collective understanding of the character, and everyone freaks out. I do think that is accurate. I do think that is true. You could say that changes are liked if they're good changes, and you could argue that maybe the changes that Russell did weren't good. You can argue that, but I think it is probably true that whenever the Doctor's character changes, there is always a collective massive pushback from the fan base, whether it is small things like the Doctor kissing for the first time. If any of you were obviously around in, the 90s, I remember seeing a bunch of... I wasn't alive in the 90s, but I've seen a bunch of, the news coverage of Paul McGann kissing, and obviously the famous JNT quote, "No hanky-panky in the TARDIS," and then obviously you get Tennant doing it, and slowly it became more normalised, but you still get people grumbling about it to this day, or bigger things, like the Doctor's gender swapping. There was a lot of, kind of debate about that, and, what it means for the character, and I think he is right to a certain extent that any, major change you make to a character like the Doctor is going to be met with resistance. Even small things like having a Doctor with a less consistent costume, which he kind of gestures towards here, is seen as a massive departure. So it is really funny when Doctor Who fans are like, I want someone brand new to do a brand new vision and do something completely different with it. But these incredibly, almost, not to say minor things, but these microcosms of Doctor Who, have to be immovable. They have to stay the same. And I do think that is an interesting challenge for any prospective future showrunner or successor to Russell to deal with. I don't envy anyone who takes on the role of showrunner, to be honest. I have my criticisms of all three, men who have taken up the role and their works, but I don't envy the position. And I don't think it's an easy position to get right either. I think it's very easy to go, well, if I was the guy in charge, I would just do this, that, and the other. But, it's very easy to say that from a distance, do you know what I mean? Actually being in the weeds of a show with such a kind of, to be honest, divided fan base, divided audience, different age demographics, different kind of views on what Doctor Who as a show should be. Obviously, you've got classic Who fans who are obviously, older, but then you've also got, my generation, which are kind of the kids who grew up in the 2000s. But then you've got kids now who are growing up with this stuff now, and all of those different groups have different views on what this show is. And I don't think that's an easy thing to juggle, and I think you can kind of see that in this latest era. You'll have episodes like Space Babies, which are obviously very geared to young children, juxtaposed with episodes like something like The Well, for example, which is very much playing on 2000s era nostalgia, but then you get finales like, The Reality War, which bring back the Rani and Omega, which is very much trying to play to the classic Who crowd. So it must be a hard thing to navigate. I think that is probably undersold, but in terms of what he says about the future of Doctor Who, it's not too different from what we've heard, but it is interesting to hear that he himself like, is not happy about this break. You kind of get the sense that Russell was relatively against a lot of Disney's, like, decision-making. I mean, the fact that he always said, and always made a point of saying in his Doctor Who magazine column that, no, I watch Doctor Who on broadcast time. I don't watch it at midnight, I watch it at broadcast time. That's the main time for me. You know, I think stuff like that is kind of an indicator that maybe he's not as on board with the streaming model as, you know, Disney is, for example. I think that probably is very much true. I think even in a recent interview he said he hopes the model collapses because it's just become so oversaturated and, like, TV shows have just become movies that have been chopped up. So, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff. I've got a lot of opinions on just this quote. Obviously, I know that it's just a quote, and, you know, you could say that there's not much new to it, but, you know, I'm me, so I have stuff to say. But let me know what you guys think about this. As always, your comments will be appreciated down below. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you do, and I'll see you later.